All right, welcome to the Richard Watkins podcast, the latest and greatest episode. We have a very special guest with us today, but before we get started, we have to give a huge shout out to the folks that make this podcast possible, the Science Policy Action Network. If you are a person out there and you're feeling as though innovation is moving forward at breakneck speed, you're not alone. As well, the Science Policy Action Network is here to bridge the gap between you and innovation. Whether you're associated with a school, administrator, an organization, or government body, we are here to have your back. Because I know you probably have a lot of questions from artificial intelligence to climate change. We have your back. And if you are a researcher and you're looking to figure out ways to communicate your research, we also help you out as well. If you're looking for more information, check out the Science Policy Action Network at www.span-inc.org. Let's do it one more time. www.span-inc.org. Now, without that out the way, without further ado, we'll get to our very, very special guest, Lauren Fox, PhD, Senior Director of Policy and Research. Lauren has more than 15 years of education, research, and policy experience at the local, state, and national levels. Her work with the forum involves guiding the organization's research, policy analysis, engagement, and advocacy efforts in order to support a strong and equitable system of public education in North Carolina. Lauren also serves as the guiding committee for the Color of Education and is a founding board member of the Education Justice Alliance. Prior to joining the forum, Lauren lived for 10 years in New York City, where she worked as a researcher and consultant for a number of organizations, including the Public Good, the Center for Understanding Race and Education, the Ford Foundation, the New York Civil Liberties Union, and U.S. Department of Justice. Lauren earned her PhD in sociology and education, the concentration in education policy from Columbia University's Teacher College, and her undergraduate degree from UNC Asheville. She grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and is a proud graduate of Charlotte Mecklenburg School System. Please join us as we welcome Dr. Lauren Fox. Dr. Lauren Fox, that was a impressive resume. Did I leave out anything? What did I leave out?
No, that was most of my life story. So thank you for reading it all. And it's great to be here.
Huge shout out. Also, the Public School Forum of North Carolina is the forum that is referenced in her bio, an
Yes.
amazing organization, which I am proud to serve as an advisory board member for. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. And just really quickly, I have to admit, full disclosure, I've been involved with education my whole life. But I have to be honest, I actually didn't like school growing up until I was in high school. I thought it was boring. What about you? Were you always a star student? How was your experience in school growing up?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that it went one way or the other the whole time. I think, I enjoyed school most when I had really strong and engaging teachers and hands-on activities. I liked it for the most part. There were subjects that I preferred. I wasn't a math person until I got into statistics in college, and then I loved math. But for the most part, I would say I liked school, and I definitely had a wonderful experience going through the CMS school system.
Awesome. What were some of the memories that you had about going through the Charlotte Mecklenburg school system that kind of guided you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think so. I went to, I'm gonna date myself, but I started school in 1990, the early 90s. And I was part of, or I was a student during Charlotte Mecklenburg's controlled choice school desegregation plan. So it wasn't like the original school desegregation. But I went to magnet schools. I attended really diverse schools, which I think while I didn't know what that meant at the time, I didn't know how rare that was at the time. That provided me with a lot of opportunities to expand my knowledge, expand my network, and I think just have really rich learning experiences that shaped what I hope to have for my own children, and for other children in North Carolina and across the country. So I just in I went to First Ward Elementary, which I think is an amazing school, and we just had so many school-wide activities and really amazing project-based learning, and I got to work really creatively with my peers. And that continued throughout my school experience. And I think it just really led me to be a more critical thinker, more creative. And then when I started to learn more about policy, then I realized that my experiences may not be typical of everyone's. And that's sort of what led me to grad school and where I am today.
All right, before we get into some of the policy pieces in your experience in graduate school, you said you weren't a math person until statistics. What was your favorite subject coming up in school?
I would say social studies, and I love science too. Um, I've always been a sort of policy nerd, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I mean science too, especially biology, was one of my favorite subjects growing up.
Wow, yeah, social studies was absolutely awesome. I love that subject too. That we're similar in that regard. Social studies
Yeah,
and science are areas that I was really passionate into. I
yeah.
never forget when I first found out it was kind of a social studies class, but it was a class called ELPSA where we started diving into civics, where I realized, and maybe I should have known it a long time ago, but I remember just the feeling I had when I found out the president of the United States was not elected by popular vote, but elected by the Electoral College. I was like, "What?" It was
What?
like mind blown. And that was that.
Yeah. I remember that, and I was in high school when the 2000 election was happening, so it was like you're seeing in real time the
Wait,
debates
so
over.
was that around the time you were like, okay, I want to know more about policy? Was it around that time?
I still wanted to be a marine biologist at that point, but
I want to be a marine biologist too.
really,
I-
wow,
I-
that's awesome.
Oh my gosh, that is wow. That is wait, hold on, let's back up really quick. So marine biologist, was there a particular animal? Was there a type
Well, there was
go
a
ahead.
specific role. I wanted to be a marine mammal veterinarian, which I ended up abandoning after realizing how few of those jobs exist. And basically, my options would be limited unless someone retired from their role. But I was all in on that for a while. I
Wow,
was into dolphins and whales.
oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
How
I
about you?
recently well, I'd always been interested in the orca, but at of recently I have become now this is going to be wild for the audience, but I recently became really interested in the elephant seal.
Ooh.
Yeah, like we just know it as this giant mammal with this long nose,
Hmm.
but it's actually one of the deepest diving mammals on Earth. Like
Wow.
it dives to depths similar to the sperm whale. It dives so, yeah, thank you. And you try to find a video of
Oh, I
a
will.
bull elephant seal swimming underwater. I could not find it. So it's just a and apparently, we're drifting way off subject, but that's okay. But apparently, they dive so deep and it takes them so long that they actually fall asleep during the dive
And they
and
just keep
then
going.
and keep going and then wake up once they get to the depths
That
where they
is an
start feeding.
awesome way to exercise and do what you need to
If you
do.
looked at an elephant seal, you would not know that it exercises all the time.
No,
But
that's
I
hilarious.
recently found that out, and since finding that out, I was like, "What? This is absolutely amazing, right?
Yeah, if I had known that, I would have been very into them. So thank you. Now I'm gonna watch some videos.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There you go. But like getting back into policy, right?
Mhm.
You were into marine biology, but at some point you started really thinking, like, I really need to understand policy around this educational system because not everyone's experience is like mine.
Mhm.
What was that moment when you realized that other people's educational experience might be worse or better than your own? And I guess that meant like you started recognizing inequity within education.
Exactly.
What was that
Yeah.
experience?
I would say that that really hit home in college. I mean, certainly I noticed within school inequities while I was in high school, just with who was in what classes and, who had which teachers, et cetera. But when I got to college in my senior year, I worked on a research project called the State of Black Asheville at UNC Asheville, led by Dr. Dwight Mullen, who was a mentor to me. And I led the education portion of that project where we were gathering data from Asheville City schools on a wide range of racial inequities. So looking at advanced course enrollment, GPA, other student outcomes, discipline rates, things like that. And so while I had, I think, noticed and, seen some of these inequities in my own life, that was the first time that I was really exposed to the data, and had more to point to, I guess. And it was an amazing project. We gathered data, wrote a report, and then we presented the findings to community members and policymakers in a forum where they were together. And the community members and policymakers were engaging in conversation about what does this mean? Why is it this way? What do we do about it? And that was just life-changing for me. I mean, after that, I knew I wanted to continue on and work in the education field and education policy and research and really focus on addressing inequities in the education system.
Yeah. Oh, were you going to say something? I didn't want to cut
No,
you off
no.
because
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to jump right in, and
Yeah.
I want to eventually go to, I guess, your migration from North Carolina to New York, but I want to stay in that the Asheville area just a little bit. What did you find as some of the kind of like underpinning factors that influence the inequity in the kind of
Uh,
the Asheville area as a school system? What were you seeing then?
I would say I mean, there were, it was all really eye-opening. Massive racial disparities with discipline rates, as for those of us who are in the field, that's not surprising. It was mainly Black and white students at the time. Most students in the district were going to Asheville High School. I'm actually not sure how much the district has grown, but I'm sure it's a lot. Um, and AP course enrollment and GPA were really stark as well. I can't cite the specifics, but like looking at the class rank, there were only a few students of color in the top half of the distribution. And there was incredible within school segregation when it came to course enrollments. And so, a lot of those trends are things that are ongoing, in some cases worse now statewide, than they were at the time. But Asheville or it was at least, I think it probably still is, a very segregated and unequal city, as are many in North Carolina. And that was absolutely evident in the public school system. So for me, it was just a huge eye opener when looking at how the data actually played out. Um, and talking to community members and hearing their stories was just really powerful in impacting me and my desire to continue working in this field.
I could I could feel you like teleporting back to that experience, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's evident that it had an impact on you, as well as it should. Um, moving from that, and I could spend our entire time just talking about your research in Asheville. But I don't have you forever, and you got to go do policy work. But you then went to New York,
Mhm.
and before we really start kind of digging into some of your work there, what were some of your first like impressions, right? Because you're leaving like the South,
Yep.
and then you're going to New York City,
Mhm.
right? I don't know if you remember, like a long time ago, there was like a salsa. I think it was like a salsa commercial, and they wanted like salsa like from Texas, I think. And they was like, "Where's your salsa from?" And he's like, "New York
Oh.
City." And so there was like, so there's this huge cultural difference,
Yeah.
right? That could play a role in what you saw in
Yeah.
education. What did you see in education in New York, and how did it compare to what you saw in education in North Carolina?
That is such a good question. I love it. And we could probably talk the rest of the time about that too. First impressions, let's see. I mean, size, obviously. Um, New York's school system has about, similar number of students to North Carolina's entire student population. It was overwhelming to try to understand the political structure there in a city's school system. And the power dynamics were really different. So at the time we had mayoral control in New York. And it really sort of operated as its, just very uniquely, and in a very complicated way. School choice was something that I wasn't really on my radar before moving to New York, but charter schools were a major um, issue at the time. There were a lot of charter schools expanding across the city, which some of them were, very well regarded. Others were, criticized for various things, but that was something that was new to me and, since has become much more part of my thinking when it comes to North Carolina public schools, of course, but at the time they were pretty new. The teachers union was really strong in New York. That's something that, we have a strong um, NCAE here in North Carolina, but they don't have collective bargaining power. So that was quite a different dynamic there. Um, Pay and funding's a lot higher there. Um, and then, what I was really focused on is racial inequities and socioeconomic inequities. And one of the things that I would say surprised me, because we think of places up north being more um, progressive, I guess, when it comes to issues of race, right? But New York schools, at least at the time, were much more segregated than North Carolina schools and didn't have that history that we have because of the court order and the subsequent policies of school desegregation, and they never really addressed their issues. Um, North Carolina has returned to very segregated schools. But at the time, that was something that was surprising to me and really eye-opening that, the North, many districts in the North never really dealt with school segregation, and it persists in many dramatic ways. And there's a lot of, I mean, huge income inequality. Um, there are a lot of public schools there that require tests or other admission criteria to get in. So it creates this, pretty divided system. So that was really fascinating. And honestly, in studying, I did a lot of work on school desegregation during my 10 years there. And another thing that was really eye-opening to me is that we saw very similar pushback to efforts to integrate that we saw during the civil rights movement here in the South, um, from white privileged parents. And, that it didn't surprise me after a while spending time talking to folks, but I think that is something that, will always be with me, is watching people protest efforts to integrate schools in New York City in the 2000s.
Right. So they were, protesting efforts of integration,
Mhm.
and you witnessed these comments and these protests. What why were people saying they wanted to prevent this from happening? Like, how did they articulate their opposition to this?
The language is different, right, than it was during the civil rights movement. It wasn't blatant, you know, racist jargon. It was about protecting their own child from having, in some cases, from what they perceived as potentially less safe schools or less academically rigorous. And that was the case both for, like, for example, there would be schools that were going to have new assignment um, policies where, a school that was predominantly wealthy families would be merged or sort of co-zoned with the housing project, or efforts to detrack, so to eliminate within school segregation through like gifted and talented programs and things like that. And we saw those kinds of conversations happening in both instances.
I don't know. Like hearing you say that is kind of like a shock too, but I don't know why I would be shocked because, I've always been a fan of, hip hop and rap. And, a lot of it emerged from New York,
Hmm.
where they were articulating like disparities. And so I don't know why I didn't, you know, grasp that and then apply it to, how that would impact, education. I mean, and so what were you doing at this time? You were a consultant at this time when you were in New York, or what were
I
you doing at
had
this time?
in great grad student form, I had like four different jobs at one time. So I worked on a research team throughout my time at Columbia, where our focus was researching school desegregation, parental attitudes about where to send their children to school, and then how to kind of try to mitigate some of those issues when schools are integrating and people aren't happy, whether it's the families that are, lower wealth, people of color living in areas that are being gentrified, or more privileged, mostly white families that are having their schools integrated for whatever reason. So we did a lot of work on that through that research project. My consulting work was related more sometimes to school desegregation court cases. So most of this work was through my research projects.
Right. And but one of the things that I want to really know is why, why race, why racial inequities? How did you determine like that was your calling and that was your interest? I know you were just talking about how, yeah, I don't think I picked up on when was the moment that you were like, this is, the mountain that I want to climb. This is the challenge that I want to tackle. And it's a grand challenge. And, I completely agree with you. But what was the moment that you realized that you wanted to address these racial inequities?
I don't know if there was just one. I mean, like I said about the research at UNC Asheville, that was an eye-opening experience for me. Um, but I think as I learned more and more, the reason why I wanted to focus on race is because it persists regardless of what you do to address other inequities. Race is a constant inequity if you eliminate socioeconomic inequities, if you eliminate, a wide range of various resource inequities. And, those things are all real, but I think I just realized if we don't address racism and structural inequities related to race, we're not going to get where we need to be. And so that, that sort of shaped my why, but then also just my, going through sort of these learning experiences as a white woman, I also feel like white people need to take responsibility and study and learn and figure out how we can do our own work to address these issues. And so from a personal standpoint, that, that was a huge part. And I don't think there was like one epiphany time. It was like many times over the course of years that have shaped where I am now. And I think that will continue as I continue in
Yeah,
this work.
absolutely, absolutely. That's powerful. So, you're now back in North Carolina. Thank you for coming back to us. And you're with the Public Education Forum of North Carolina. Tell us a little bit about your role with the forum. Um, yeah, tell us about that, and then we'll go into some of the policy pieces
Yeah.
that the forum is a champion for. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your work with the forum.
Yeah, so I've been at the forum for it's been almost 6 years now. That's hard to believe. I saw the job posting on Twitter and left New York within 2 weeks while still finishing my dissertation. I was just like, I'm ready. I want to go back to North Carolina. This job seems perfect. I really like the blend of research and policy. So that's what drew me to the position. And we do a lot of different work on our team. Um, we have annual research papers that we put out. So we have a local school finance study and a roadmap of need, which, well, actually the roadmap is every 2 years. But those sort of look at we gather data across county level and report on school funding and out of school factors that relate to inequities in the education system. So those are used as tools by various community organizations, policymakers, et cetera, to think about what are the resources that are needed and how can we target those to the students who need them most. We do a lot of work following and engaging in the state level policy process. We meet with policymakers. We issue annual or biennial recommendations and update those in the second year of the biennium for mainly for state policymakers that we hope they will address. That is our top education issues. Our most recent one was published in May, and that was an update from our 2003-2005 biennium. And those are all based on our research, on our conversations with educators, students, families, et cetera. We also have been increasingly going out into communities and trying to help people understand how education policy works. And this is actually my favorite part of my job right now, because a lot of people don't know, and our education system is complicated, and it's hard to know who's responsible for what. So I think, during the pandemic, we saw both appreciation for our public schools and our teachers and a lot of criticism, right? Um, and something that I kind of just carry with me is when people are frustrated or happy, we need to know who it is that's responsible for that frustration or happiness. Um, and, a lot of our decisions for education in North Carolina and in most states are coming from the state level. So we're really trying to help people understand that process, how to reach out to their policymakers, how to be informed voters, where North Carolina stands in relation to other states on a number of key issues related to educators, related to funding, mental health, et cetera. So we do presentations, we do virtual workshops, we do lots of different things to try to spread that information statewide.
Um, a quick question before I kind of go into like the policies that are important to the forum. And I don't know if you know this, but it just kind of popped in my head. You were talking about how North Carolina compares to other states, and I don't know how best to articulate this, so I'm just going to just say it. What's what state does public education the best?
None, none.
Oh, okay. I feel like everybody has room for improvement, but I'm just like, who does it
No,
the
I mean,
best?
There are states like if you look at funding, for example, like
Yeah.
Massachusetts, New Jersey, they both, Northern California has pretty good funding, I think, relative. Most states have pretty good funding relative to North Carolina. But I often point to Massachusetts, New Jersey, some other states in New England that tend to have better funding, but that doesn't mean that they're more equitable. So, and that's just looking at funding. Most other states also pay their teachers a lot better than we do. Um, but all states have a lot of work to do. Yeah. So,
Is there
especially North
is there
Carolina.
especially, and that's really, I mean, I hope to bring in guests from all over the globe, all over the country, right? But obviously, I'm a North Carolinian, so I do care a great deal about North
Yeah.
Carolina. So, uh, but is there ever going to be like a point where you're like, education's good enough, my job is done, or is it
That's
always kind of like this fleeting objective that, like, as we get closer to it, the further away it somehow becomes? Like, is there I don't even know how to say what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
is there a time where you're like in your head where you're like, okay, my job is done?
If all inequities in education are eradicated and children have all of the resources they need, then yeah, I
Yes.
would love to work myself out of a job if that's the outcome.
That was a great articulation.
We're
I
nowhere
love the
close to
way you
that.
said that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but is that a reflection of inequities in society, or are they just unique to education?
Oh, no, I mean, it's inequities in society, but I will say that I think we're moving further from that goal right now because of increasing disinvestments and lack of support for public education.
Okay, let's go ahead and go there, because no matter who you talk to, right, regardless of whether or not you like vehemently disagree with them, everybody claims to be doing what they feel is the best for
Mhm.
children, right? No one explicitly comes out and says, like, I want to do this because I just don't want children to perform well. Everybody's
Right.
trying, right? And it comes down to like policy differences. I mean, I guess, right? I don't want to attribute
Yeah.
nefarious reasons, even though there could be. I just don't want to say that policy differences. So, what are the policy positions of the forum, and why those particular policy decisions are policies? And like, do you come up with them? Like, because you're like the policy director, so I feel like you come up with them. That's extraordinary power, by the
I
way.
don't do
But
it by myself, but
you've got
um
a lot of books behind you. I'm pretty sure they
yeah.
help. But yeah, what are some of those? What are some of the policies? And if you could break them down for us, right? Don't assume that I know anything. Tell me about the policies, and break them down as why they're important.
Okay. I'll try to not take up the rest of the time with this. But so I'm going to start with our top education issues because those are the most current. We have ongoing sort of policy priorities that are very big and broad, related to, general support for public schools, equitable outcomes, et cetera. But specifically for the current biennium, we focused on educator pay. So North Carolina, our latest ranking nationally is 38th in the country for teacher pay. And that includes all sources of pay. So that includes local salary supplements, which, as um, folks may not know, vary quite a bit across the state. So wealthier counties with more property tax revenue can pay their teachers much higher salary supplements, like Wake County, like Charlotte, and others. It also includes master's pay, which is something that was ended in 2013. So only certain educators are still grandfathered into that program. It includes bonuses, et cetera. So that average pay, which is, I believe, around 56, I want to say, thousand per year, is not reflective of what many teachers make. Our beginning average pay, again, with all of these supplements added in, is about 42,000. So looking at cost of living, looking at what other fields are paying, that's a major priority for us. We're just losing teachers left and right. We have not nearly enough teachers coming through the pipeline through our teacher prep programs. And so, and the reason, I guess, the core reason is that teachers are the number one school-related factor that impacts student outcomes. So without high quality, diverse teacher workforce, teacher diversity is also tied very strongly to academic and social and long-term outcomes for all students. So if we don't invest in our educators, then we're going to have really long-term negative impacts because of that. So that was our first issue for the biennium. We also had a separate one. Teachers and educators got two. We had a separate one that was focused on teacher recruitment, retention, and diversity, and other ways that we can help to address the challenges, like expanding and investing more money into our North Carolina Teaching Fellows program, like supporting educators to get national board certification, which is both good for their professional development, but also gives them a salary supplement. Like investing in grow your own teacher programs to help rural districts and districts that are particularly struggling to recruit teachers, invest in folks from their own communities to come back and teach. Another major priority is mental health and school safety. So North Carolina we have far fewer school social workers, school psychologists, counselors, and nurses than are recommended. And so we need to do a lot to both add additional positions and increase pay, again, similar to the teaching profession, increase pay and recruitment and retention efforts for those roles so that we have folks who can help to deal with the increasing challenges around student mental health. And that would have a major impact both in terms of helping to address really significant mental health challenges, hopefully reduce discipline rates that often are tied to those challenges, and take some of the burden off of teachers and other staff who are having to serve the role of counselor or social worker in addition to teaching, right? So that's a major area. I'm thinking funding is the one I always talk about last. And for that one, we are including, I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, prepare students for the world they live in. So this is a big one, and it's got a lot of different pieces. So one is really about making sure that our young people have access to curriculum that is reflective of the diverse student population that our schools serve. So we've seen these huge pushes away from representative curriculum when it comes to race, history of racism, LGBTQ representation and issues. And that's really, really concerning for us because we know that students being able to see themselves in the curriculum is a huge part of what keeps them engaged and allows them to feel like, interested and like they're learning about themselves. And we know that there are many positive outcomes of culturally relevant pedagogy that we're fearful are going to be much harder to realize with these pushes for book banning and things like that. Also in that general umbrella is expanding our accountability system in North Carolina, which right now we have an A through F school grading system that is based entirely on test score outcomes. And the grades reflect a formula that is 80% weighted on student proficiency. So a one-time test score outcome. So if a student had a bad day, et cetera, a school had a bad day, 80% of their score is going to come from that one test, and then 20% from growth. We've been supporting a much more holistic way of evaluating schools so that parents and policymakers understand that there are many factors that reflect school quality, not just test scores. And then I'll get to funding. Funding undergirds just about all of these issues. We can't do anything really without adequately and equitably funding our schools. So we advocated for the implementation of the Leandro Comprehensive Remedial Plan, which was ordered. It's a 30-year-old court case for those of your audience who are not aware, where there have been continuous findings that North Carolina is not adequately funding its public schools. The Supreme
Wait,
Court,
wait. Let me
yeah,
jump in there really quick. And sorry if you were about to say,
no, please.
tell the audience because many people hear the term Leandro case. Could you kind of break down what that was? And forgive me if
Yes.
that's what you were about to do. I just wanted to make sure folks
No,
know
this
what
is
the
like a
Leandro
whole
case
nother
was.
thing. So I thank you for slowing me down. So the Leandro case began with 5 Lowell school districts suing the state, saying we don't have enough funding to support or to provide the basic needs, educational needs for our students. And additional urban districts joined the case to say we don't have enough funding to equitably serve different student populations with different levels of need, which in the case are termed at-risk student groups. So it's a 30-year-old case. Like I said, there have been multiple rulings by lower and Supreme Court saying, yes, we're not adequately and equitably funding our schools. However, until the most recent Supreme Court ruling in November 2002, which reaffirmed a lower court ruling that ordered the state to actually transfer money to implement a comprehensive remedial plan, which was put together by parties on both sides of the case with actual dollar amounts saying we need to invest in the teacher pipeline and the principal pipeline and early childhood education, additional funding for Lowell schools and many other investments that were based on research. And the state needs to fund it because they've been not doing that for 30 years. So the Supreme Court in 2002 ruled that the state had to transfer funding to fund the comprehensive remedial plan. And then that was in November. A new majority took over in January after the November election, flipped the political composition of the Supreme Court. And soon after, they agreed to rehear the case, which has happened. They have reheard arguments in the case, basically that amount to the courts can't tell the state to, or the General Assembly specifically to appropriate money. And a decision is pending, so something could happen anytime. Um, and so we don't really know what's going to happen there. And we also don't know, even if the Supreme Court upholds the ruling and says the state has to transfer money, what is the mechanism for making that happen? That's about all that they can do, to my knowledge. I'm not a lawyer. But the bottom line is we're doing pretty terribly when it comes to school funding. We're 48th in the country after adjusting for regional cost differences in per student spending. So 48th in per student spending, 49th in funding effort, which is a measure of our spending relative to our state wealth overall. So we have a lot more money that we could be spending on education that we're choosing not to spend.
You know what's weird about that? And I'm so sorry for jumping in.
No,
I promise it's the last
I've
time
been
I jump
rambling, please.
in. In regards to education, it's almost like night and day because K through 12 education, we're 48th, but higher education, we're near the top. I think we're in the top 10. And I want to say top 5, but I'm just not sure. But we're like in the top 10 as far as higher education, but we're on the bottom rung when it comes to K through 12. Sometimes it's hard for me to square the circle on how we approach education. It's like, well, we don't necessarily care about K through 12, we care about higher education. And I don't know if you've seen those numbers, if
I
that's what you've
haven't, and I'd
seen.
be really curious to see like what's included in that because that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it came, I think North Carolina Office of Science, Technology, and Innovation had a report a while back that was in there. But anyway, I digress. But you were mentioning that, and I was like, this that's interesting. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I turn it right back over to you.
No, I mean, I think that pointing out higher ed and the strength of our higher ed system, as well as the strength of our business sector and economy, is something that we really have to keep in mind when it comes to investing in our public schools. Like those things are not going to continue to succeed in the way that they have been if we're not investing in our public school system to get students through those pipelines. And I mean, we have, even though we've been in this, Leandro case for 30 years, we have been doing a lot better in previous years. We had made a lot of improvements in the 1990s. Jim Hunt was the education governor. He did a lot to try to improve teacher pay and school funding. We never got where we needed to be, but we were in a much better place. And so I think a lot of times when we talk about our successes, we have to recognize that a lot of that is a result of the investments that were being made during the time I was in school, and many of the people who are in the workforce right now. Yeah.
Um, but you were then going on to talk about um funding and how we had to transfer funding. We were going to transfer funding to public education, but where were we transferring it from?
So that was not specified. It would be the general fund. So yeah, they didn't specify, but it would be the General Assembly's responsibility. And it may mean, I think what it would definitely mean is we could not continue with the planned tax cuts that have been implemented for corporations and for individuals. The General Assembly has a plan to get us to a 0% corporate tax rate in the next few years. Um, we're already lowest in the country in terms of when looking at the corporate tax rate for states that actually have one. So we'd have to at least do fewer tax cuts. And, I think there are other areas, like we haven't even talked about school vouchers yet, which we should get into, but there are other things that we would have to think about when it comes to aligning priorities around public schools and our budget. But I will say that North Carolina has, in recent years, had quite a bit of surplus funding in our state revenue coffers. And so we have had the money to spend to implement the Leandro Comprehensive Remedial Plan. We've just chosen not to do it.
And so I've heard funding underpins everything.
Mhm.
Uh, increasing the earnings or increasing the salaries of our teachers are very critical. Um, are there any other policy pieces that you feel are important? I know you probably didn't touch on everything.
There are so many. I mean, so what I touched on was the forum's priorities, and
Right,
I
yeah,
I do want to talk about vouchers because that's really the biggest issue right now, I think, that we've been focused on.
please.
But I also think like I have to mention early childhood education, which isn't our focus. We're a K-12 focused organization, but investing in early childhood and out of school time as well shows some of the biggest long-term academic benefits to anything that you can appropriate money for when it comes to education. And so I think that that's a huge area of need. There are many children who do not have access to high quality early childhood and out of school time learning opportunities, which we just have to address waiting lists. We have to address the costs for families, and that's going to be an increasing problem with the ESSER funding cliff. So that's really important to mention. But let's talk about vouchers, which is not unrelated. Um, vouchers are really the expansion of the North Carolina voucher program, and I'll give a little bit of background on that, is one of the major concerns that I have in terms of where we're headed as a state right now. And So we have right now, two existing private school voucher programs when funding programs. One is the Education Savings Account, which is reserved for students with disabilities to receive funding to attend a private school if their needs are not being met in the public school that they're assigned to. The other is the Opportunity Scholarship Program, which historically it was created in 2013 or implemented in 2013, and historically has been reserved for low wealth families. The definition of low wealth or families that are eligible has changed over time with the income threshold being increased over the past decade or so. But the stated purpose was to provide, again, another alternative opportunity for students who could not afford to attend private school, um, to seek other options if they were not having their needs met in their public school. So they also had to have attended public school before in order to be eligible. Last year, the General Assembly voted to implement a universal voucher program, um, which rebranded the Opportunity Scholarship Program, making it accessible to any family, regardless of their income, and to any and regardless of whether they had attended public schools before. So that idea of, you know, if your public school's not serving you and you can't afford to go to private school is really kind of thrown out the window with that redesign and universal voucher concept. Um, Another thing that's important to know about this program is that private schools that receive funding through the voucher program are held to basically zero, very minimal accountability requirements. They have to report very little information about student outcomes, and that which they do have to report is mostly not publicly available. So we're not able to assess the extent to which they're providing a quality education to the students that they serve. There are no curricular requirements. There are no teacher certification requirements. There are very little financial reporting requirements. And perhaps most concerning is that these schools can discriminate in their admissions process based on religion, based on sexual identity, gender identity, um, based on family values. They don't have to provide meals or transportation. So there are many families who rely on that who would be excluded from the program. They can require fees for the admissions and all sorts of things. So we're concerned as an organization about what this means for the future of our students when we're investing billions of dollars. The plan is to invest billions of dollars over the course of the next decade in these private schools that we know very little about. And there have been quite a few studies lately looking at other universal voucher programs that have shown negative academic impacts for students. So, looking at these billions of dollars that can be spent, the billions of dollars of need facing our traditional public schools that serve 85% of students right now in North Carolina, and we're going to be transferring a lot of the money that could be going to address those issues that our local public schools are facing to private schools that don't have standards. Much of these scholarships are probably going to go to families that are already sending their kids to private schools. So we're headed in a direction where I fear that this is becoming the alternative to adequately funding our local public schools. And we'll continue to see growing inequities as a result.
That's a powerful, powerful closing statement. And obviously, I just want to thank you so much for one, the work you do. Um, it's critical. Absolutely. So thank you for your service. Moreover, thank you for taking the time out to be with us for this hour. I know we're all really, really busy, and I don't take this hour for granted. So thank you for spending it with us.
Thank you.
Um, in closing, um, is there anything you'd like to say in closing that you want the audience to hear, like a nugget at the end that you would
Mhm.
like to leave with them?
I think we all, as parents in particular, are very concerned about the needs of their own child and what's best for their own child. And I don't begrudge anyone that. I have a child myself. I'm going to make decisions that are best for him. But I think as a collective state, we really have to think about what we're, how we're investing and making decisions that will impact our entire state in many different ways for the future. And I can't think of a more important investment than a public education system that serves any child that walks through its doors. Everyone is impacted regardless of whether you have kids in public schools, regardless of whether you have family that have kids in public schools. We're all impacted by this. And so I just ask folks to learn more. Visit our website, www.ncforum.org. You can reach out to me at lfox@ncforum.org. Learn more, learn where your local representatives and senators stand on public education issues and vote accordingly. This is not a partisan thing. It's about doing what's best for kids. And so that's what I'll say. We have a really important election coming up. And I just think we all need to be really informed and think hard about how we're voting.
Dr. Lauren Fox, Senior Policy Director for the Public Education Forum of North Carolina. Thank you so much for your time and being with us today.
Thanks for having me.